Most people think they understand what a film producer does, but I would say most don't. And that confusion is exactly why so many filmmakers think they're producing when they're not actually building anything. Not every producer credit means the same thing, and not everyone listed as producer is carrying the same responsibility or the same risk. In this video, I'm going to break down the different types of producers you see on screen and explain who's actually building the movie and who's playing a very different role. But before we dive deeper, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. All right, let's jump in. The producer credits you keep seeing and what they actually mean. First, we need to acknowledge something up front. Producer is a loosely defined term in this industry, and that's where a lot of confusion starts. Because when you watch the credits and see a long list of producers, it can look like a dozen people were all doing the same job, but they weren't. Producer credits represent different kinds of contribution, different levels of responsibility, and very different relationships to risk. So let's separate perception from reality. When you see produced by, that is the principal producer. That is the lead producer. That is the person who takes the project from script to screen, assumes the financial and creative risk, and ultimately makes the film happen. That's not symbolic, that's operational. In most cases, it's one person, sometimes two, occasionally three. Even if the credits show dozens of producers, there are usually only 1 to 3 true principal producers. And that distinction matters because produced by isn't just a label, it's accountability. It means that if the financing falls apart, they're dealing with it. If the production goes off the rails, they're solving it. If distribution gets complicated, they're navigating it. They are carrying the project across the finish line. And yes, those are the individuals eligible to accept the Best Picture Oscar. Not because it looks good on stage, but because the industry recognizes something very specific. If a film exists and it made it to the finish line, that principal producer carried the responsibility to get it there. That's what that credit really represents. Next, you'll often see people simply listed as producer. This is where a lot of filmmakers get confused because producer sounds like the same thing as produced by. It's not. And that distinction matters more than people realize. There's a significant distinction. Produced by indicates primary responsibility. Producer indicates meaningful contribution, but not overall accountability. So when someone is listed as a producer, it doesn't automatically mean they were the person assembling the film from day one between carrying the risk and solving every problem. They may have contributed something essential. They may have helped attach something critical. They may have played a meaningful role in the film happening, but they were not necessarily the person whose name is on the line if the film collapses. Then there's the co-producer. This is another credit people assume they understand and often don't. A co-producer is often a secondary creative producer. Frequently, it's someone local to where the film is being shot, someone who helps facilitate production within that region, coordinating logistics and local relationships. In practical terms, this is often the person who helps you make production actually function in a specific location. They know who to call, they know what's realistic, they can solve regional problems quickly. They help carry the process and keep things moving on the ground. They're not the lead producer. Then you have the associate producer credit. This is typically a courtesy credit awarded to someone who contributed substantially and deserves recognition. And I want to be clear, courtesy doesn't mean pay. It means you're acknowledging real value that mattered, even if the person wasn't responsible for building the film end to end. For example, one of the stories indie producer and co-founder of Indie Film Ins and Outs, Mark Klevanoff, shared recently is about this. He has a project gearing up in Mississippi, and a local content went far beyond expectations. Arranging locations, lining up connections, assisting heavily during scouting. That kind of support saves real time, real stress, and sometimes real money. So that person was awarded an associate producer credit as an acknowledgement of the work. That's exactly what that credit is supposed to be. Recognition of meaningful contribution without confusing it with overall accountability. Now let's shift into the financial side. This is where people get even more confused. Executive producers or co-executive producers are typically individuals or entities involved in financing the film. They may be direct investors, or they may have helped secure or facilitate investment. And yes, distributors often receive executive producer credits as well, particularly if they are involved in the project at an early stage. So when you see a long list of executive producers, it's not automatically because a bunch of people were creatively developing the story. Most of the time, that credit is tied to money. And Mark has talked about why we're seeing so many executive producers these days. On one of his films, there were 12 executive producers. Even even though there are only 4 financing sources. So how does that happen? Because each financing entity often includes multiple people attached. One financier might receive 4 executive producer credits. A distributor might receive 2 credits. Another investing company might receive 2. So that's why you'll see a long list. It's not always 12 different sources. It can be a few different sources with a lot of names attached. And if somebody successfully finds financing for the project, a finder, they will often receive an executive producer credit as well. And then there's a line producer. The line producer is a boots on the ground production authority. They manage logistics, hire crew, oversee the budget and schedule, and ensure the film is executed properly from production standpoint. Their responsibility is delivery on time and on budget. That's the mandate. This is a huge job. It's not glamorous, but it's essential. The line producer is a person making sure production is actually moving. The day is actually working and you're not lighting money on fire with chaos. So we've covered the basics. That's the surface level answer. Now let's talk about the deeper reality, the part that actually affects your career. A common question is, do all investors get an executive producer credit? Typically, yes, unless they decline it, but that's not the real issue. Here's where a lot of filmmakers misunderstand how this hierarchy works. A lot of people think the creative producer only handles the creative aspects while someone else raises the money. That's not how it usually works. In most real-world scenarios, the individual receiving the produced by credit is the same person assembling the budget and actively securing financing. And that's the part that catches people off guard, because many filmmakers want the creative authority, but without the financial responsibility. But the principal producer, at that level, those two things are usually connected. If you are producing the film and receiving the produced by credit, you are building the project, structuring the budget, and going out to raise the capital. You're not just shaping the story, you're building the financial architecture that allows it to exist. Then the individuals who bring the money into the project become executive producers. And this is the key distinction. The executive producers may be funding it, but the principal producer is the one who finds the executive producers and is accountable for delivering the film. That's a separation of power and responsibility. And this is where a lot of filmmakers get into trouble. They want the title, they want the control, they want the credit. They don't know how to build the structure underneath it, how to budget properly, how to position a project to be financeable, or how to think about distribution before production. And that's where careers stall. Now, if you want help actually applying this, because understanding what a producer does is one thing, but stepping into that role responsibly is another. We created the Creative Producers Filmmaking Roadmap. It's the framework we use inside our program to show you how to strategically build a project from day one, so you're not making reactive decisions once you're already on set and carrying the risk. This isn't theoretical, it's practical. It's about making smarter decisions early, before the money is spent, before commitments are locked in, and before mistakes become expensive. If you want the roadmap, it's linked below. And if you're interested in our full coaching and mentorship program, you can email us to see if it's the right fit. The details are below, but let's keep going. Now, here's another layer people don't talk about openly. Producer credits get used as leverage, and this is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. Many people want the produced by credit because it signals authority, it signals ownership. And Mark has been very direct about this. He doesn't give that credit to anyone who isn't actually doing the job. Some producers use credits as bartering tools. He doesn't recommend that approach, but it happens frequently. And it's common for individuals to receive producer credits on films they technically didn't produce. That's why the producer title can be so misleading. The credit list doesn't always communicate responsibility clearly. So you can't just read credits and assume you understand who did what. You have to understand how the industry actually uses these titles behind the scenes. Mark shared an example recently from one of his films. He and his colleague were responsible for building the entire project. They developed it, they assembled the budget, they raised the capital, they assumed the risk. They managed it from beginning to end. So they made sure they were clearly listed as produced by. Then there were 3 additional individuals listed as producer. Those people were not present from start to finish. They did not build the budget, they did not assume primary risk, but they were essential to the film happening. For example, key talent attached to the project brought value that helped move the film forward. Their contributions justified a producer credit, but it remained secondary to those who carried the full responsibility. This is the hierarchy of producers, and if you're going to operate professionally in this space, you need to understand that hierarchy, not just the optics, but the accountability underneath it. This is why actors sometimes receive producer credits, and this is another area where people make assumptions without understanding the mechanics. Actors may receive a producer credit if they contribute beyond performance. That can include helping secure financing, allowing pre-sales based on their name, participating in script development, or committing heavily to the promotion. In one of Mark's recent films, the lead actor was involved in the script development, allowed the film to be pre-sold based on the attachment, and actively participated in promotion. That involvement extended beyond acting, and it justified the credit. But being the lead actor does not automatically entitle somebody to a producer credit. That's an important distinction. That said, many actors request it as part of their deal, and strategically, it can make sense to grant it when it creates alignment because it incentivizes them to support the film's success beyond simply showing up on set. Producer credits can also be structured in ways that affect compensation arrangements. Those structures must remain legitimate and carefully handled. But there are strategic ways credits and compensation can be organized within proper guidelines. And that's where understanding both the creative and financial architecture of a film becomes critical. Now, here's the point I'd like you to take away from all this. Stop thinking of producer as one job. It's not. It is a category. And those titles represent different responsibilities, different skill sets, different proximity to risk. If you want to build a long-term career in this industry, you have to decide what lane you're actually choosing, because it's one thing to want to be a producer. It's another thing to be the person who is willing to do the job, to be the person who assembles the project, puts the budget together, raises the money, manages the inevitable chaos, navigates the politics, and still delivers. And this is why the film industry rewards execution, because this business is full of talkers, people who pitch, people who promise, people who say they're going to do it. But the ones who actually deliver, they get rehired, they get called back, they build trust with investors, they build relationships with distributors, they get the next film made. At the end of the day, producer isn't a status symbol, it's a weight. Every one of those credits represents a different level of responsibility, risk, and accountability. And if you don't understand the difference, you can spend years chasing a title instead of building the skill set behind it. So decide what lane you actually want to be in. Decide what responsibility you're willing to carry, and then build the capacity to deliver. Because in this business, the people who consistently execute are the ones who stay. If this breakdown helps you better understand the different types of producer credits and who's actually carrying responsibility versus just holding a title, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future conversations like this. Here at this channel, we focus on the real mechanics of filmmaking, the financing, the structure, the execution, and the decisions that determine whether a film actually works in the marketplace. And if there's a topic you want us to unpack next, drop it in the comments. We read them and they absolutely shape what we cover. And if you want to go deeper, check out some of our other videos on producing, funding, distribution, and more, because understanding how films get made is only the beginning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.